Alrighty, let's get straight into it. Okay, this week's question, what is a Maenad? Maenads, like a lot of mythological beings, show up in a lot of places, but the most likely place you will have seen one will be in True Blood Season 2, in which a Maenad takes the form of the uber-friendly, uber-creepy Marianne. More or less, a Maenad is just a woman who is driven insane by her ecstasy and frenzied worship of the god Dionysus. Frequently in mythology, they'd be seen carrying snakes around, or wearing big bull skull helmets, or sometimes carrying a theresis. A pole with a pine cone on it. I cannot say that word. Because they're just minor figures in mythology, as worshippers and followers of Dionysus, they don't tend to get any myths really of their own, but they do show up in a lot of significant places. Maenads were known for running through the countryside and tearing calves to pieces, but also not being able to tell humans apart from the calves they were tearing apart. It's gonna get disturbing. Quite a notable figure they tore to pieces was actually Orpheus, who's known as being one of very few Greek figures to make it in and out of the underworld still living. But most of their stories take place around the god that they worshipped. So we're going to have to get a bit of a background on Dionysus in order to understand quite what's going on in this myth. Hera tried to kill fetus Dionysus, who was then sewn into Zeus's thigh and born again, at which point Hera tried to kill him again and had him chopped up into little pieces, but then Rhea brought him back to life, and baby Dionysus was given to Persephone by Zeus, and Persephone didn't know what to do with him, so she gave him to a bunch of mortals and said, look after the kid, and Hera drove them insane. It's nice, isn't it? So instead, the baby Dionysus was given to a bunch of nymphs and disguised as a goat. Gods are good at disguises. When the kid grew up, he decided he needed to let everyone know that he was a god and spread his worship. Unfortunately, Hera recognized him before he could do this and sent him insane. This didn't even change his plans. So Dionysus set off to do some globe-trotting, wild crazy, with an army of crazy satyrs and Maenads following him, and one guy who wasn't crazy and who I can only assume stood and looked disapproving the whole time. So first things first, Dionysus goes to Egypt and meets some Amazon queens, who he invites to come with him on a quest to fight some titans. They overthrow a titan kingdom, and then he moves on to Damascus, where he flays the king alive for opposing him, builds a bridge out of some vines, and then swims across the river on a tiger anyway. The next big thing that he does is he decides to invade Thrace. King Lycurgus actually captured his entire Maenad and satyr army. Dionysus, instead of dealing with things, decides that he's gonna have a time out at the bottom of the ocean. Rhea once again saying nope to all of the events that had occurred, frees all of the Maenads and sends King Lycurgus insane. Then there's this disturbing thing where King Lycurgus thinks that he's cutting down a vine and pruning its leaves off, but it's actually his son. Let's not go there. Then Dionysus rocks up to Thebes. Presumably he's bloodied and bruised, partway singed from whatever invasion he's decided to throw, and like he always is, just a little bit drunk. The king of Thebes, Pentheus, had a rule sort of like any RSL club, no shirt, no shoes, no service, and decided that he was going to arrest everybody. All of the Maenads, the satyrs, and absolutely Dionysus. But you know what? Dionysus sent him insane! What a surprise! King Pentheus actually shackled a bull instead, and Dionysus was scot-free. The Maenads escaped and started running through the mountainside, screaming and pulling apart cattle, until they ran into King Pentheus himself, the newest member of the Maenad crowd. Pentheus's own mother, who had been turned insane, pulled his head off. While these mountainside dismemberments were taking place, Dionysus was trying to convince 3 women to join the Maenads as well, and they actually refused. He turned them insane. The 3 women were so enthralled by their new Maenaditude that one of them even offered to sacrifice her own son. After killing her son, those 3 women ran off into the countryside to join their Maenad friends, and Hermes turned up and, in an act of mercy, turned them into birds. The gods have a thing with turning people into birds out of mercy. Dionysus disagreed with this act of mercy and turned them into bats instead. Dionysus and his army decided they were going to head to Naxos, where they hadn't been on their frenzied worship me travels. They got to the port and realized that they didn't actually have a boat, and asked some nearby sailors whether they were headed in that direction. The sailors said yes, and everyone got on board. As it turned out, the sailors were actually pirates. They didn't know that Dionysus was a god, and they were planning to sell him as a slave further east. As soon as Dionysus caught on to their plans, he started turning things into animals all over the place. There were oars turning into snakes and apparitions of, like, bears on the deck, and then he turned himself into a lion, and instead of going insane, the pirates turned into dolphins because they were so terrified. I've got nothing. At some point, Rhea finally turned up and purged Dionysus of his insanity and forgave him of all of the murders that he'd committed while he was crazy, because you can do that in mythology, apparently. So there you go. Maenads, crazy women, loved Dionysus, loved wine, loved pulling people to pieces. Thesis. Thesis.